Chapter 1121 makes it clear that One Piece has officially reached its endgame. The final saga has been underway ever since the completion of Wano, but Egghead as the first arc in this saga is the opening act, the prelude for what's to come. The stage has been set perfectly, with Vegapunk's speech seemingly coming to an end in this spread, showcasing the figureheads of the main competing factions that will be leading the race after the treasure this entire story revolves itself around, the One Piece. This final saga, containing a war of unparalleled proportions, is something the fandom has been expecting for over a decade, with Whitebeard's dying words all but confirming that this would someday happen. And from the Straw Hats, to the Blackbeard pirates, to the world government, to Cross Guild, to the revolutionaries and the Marines, there will be no shortage of battles in this epic final war. The actual structure of this war remains to be seen. Will it predominantly take place in a single location in a single day like the Paramount War did, or will it encompass various locations across the world of One Piece, spanning several days or even weeks and months? What kind of alliances will there be between these opposing factions? Will the Marines and world government remain on the same side? It's difficult to say with certainty, but one thing is for sure. Luffy will be fighting a lot of people in this final saga. There are several potential matchups awaiting our main character, from Shanks to Blackbeard to Imu to Akainu. Luffy has a lot of battles waiting for him, and there's definitely even more examples than the ones I just named. Before Egghead, nobody was expecting a rematch against Lucci or a skirmish with Kizaru and the Gorosei. Of all of the highly telegraphed matchups in the story, like your Zoro vs Mihawks and Shanks vs Blackbeards, the one that is definitely the most contentious in the One Piece community is Luffy vs Akainu. This is a fight with undeniable setup. There's an emotional narrative there, there's symbolism tying these two together, there's their respective positions in the world, and so much more. But all of that setup doesn't guarantee that the fight will happen. Oda could be working towards a subversion of expectations. Luffy vs Akainu is a fight that many people adamantly believe needs to happen, including myself, but just as many people don't think that's the case for various reasons. Whether it be fueled by power scaling agendas or biases for favourite characters, this topic has been hotly debated for several years now. Some people think Akainu isn't powerful enough to face off against Luffy in the final saga. Some think Luffy vs Akainu has the highest potential for any Luffy fight in the series, since Akainu is responsible for the death of Ace in Luffy's arms. Some think Sabo is a much better opponent for Akainu than Luffy, as the current user of Ace's Devil Fruit who has presumably inherited his late brother's will. There's countless angles to tackle this from, and today I want to illustrate all the reasons why I believe Luffy vs Akainu is a match made in heaven, a battle that is begging to be drawn and waiting to happen. Before I begin though, I'd like to clarify, this is not a power scaling video. We'll be talking narrative and character writing. Sakazuki, formerly known as Akainu, is currently the figurehead of the Marines as their fleet admiral. As this is a story told from the perspective of pirates, the Marines are the most prominent antagonist faction in the series, even more so than the likes of Blackbeard and Buggy who are gunning for the One Piece. Marines exist to enforce justice by hunting down pirates and acting as peacekeepers throughout the lands. They hold a global presence and are easily the largest individual organization in the world. They are the ones closest to ruling the seas through sheer force of numbers, and Akainu leads this superpower from the very top of the organization. That being said, the Marines are the military arm of the world government. They are subservient to the celestial dragons who rule the world, which makes Akainu, despite being the figurehead of this organization, just another employee of the forces that be. That's the case for now. Throughout all of post timeskip, and especially in the recent arcs, Oda has made an effort to distinguish the world government's forces from the Marines. They are officially one entity, but Vegapunk's speech exposing the true intentions of the Gorosei and their great cleansing has made it so that this may not be the case for very long. While Marines have been the antagonists since the very beginning of the story, the real villains in the world of One Piece are the world government, and their plans involve flooding the world, which would kill many, if not all of the Marines that serve them. We've also quickly learnt that the world government does not depend on the Marines for their martial might, as was previously implied. The world government is self-sufficient. They command the Seraphim, who are worthy replacements of the Shichibukai. The Gorosei themselves are monstrously powerful. The God's Knights have been introduced and also seem to possess incredible power, and I'm sure there will be more added to the world government's forces that help to make them worthy final antagonists in their own right. But what does this all mean for Akainu and his role in this final saga? Based on this sketch Oda drew of Sakazuki as a child, he seems to have grown up in a horribly violent environment, which definitely played a major role in making him the person he is today. Funnily enough, his hat in this sketch has the kanji for justice on it, which suggests he was an aspiring marine from a very young age. Akainu's philosophy is described as absolute justice, the same philosophy that all marines are taught to uphold. Unquestioning loyalty to the cause is exactly what absolute justice entails. Akainu is prepared to do anything and everything to enforce this justice. In simple terms, he believes the end justifies the means. If the result is a net positive, he will happily do evil things to reach that result, including the killing of the same innocent civilians he lives to protect. He will kill 100 innocent people if he thinks that is in the best interests of 1,000 other innocent people, and this makes Akainu the ultimate marine, the perfect encapsulation of what a marine should be, what this system controlled by the world government desires from its soldiers. After all, justice is inextricably tied to power in the world of One Piece. Those at the top of the world determine the form that justice takes. What's interesting about Akainu is that even his most heinous acts in the story have understandable motivations from a certain perspective. They are obviously not justified, but nothing he does is simply evil for the sake of evil. He doesn't revel in doing these things, he does everything for a clear purpose, and he's a man with a code, as extreme as that code may be. Killing the Marines who deserted in Marineford is one example. This is an undeniably cruel and evil act, but from Akainu's perspective, fleeing from battle as a marine is a betrayal of the justice they exist to enforce. It's important to remember what was truly at stake in the Paramount War. Even though we view things from the perspective of Luffy and the Whitebeard pirates, if they succeeded in rescuing Ace and destroying Marine headquarters, that would have had devastating effects on a global scale. This wasn't just a battle between a single pirate crew and a handful of Marines. This was a battle for global control, a battle between the absolute freedom pirates embody that often manifests as chaos, and the order and stability provided by the Marines. And so, deserting in the eyes of Akainu is just as bad as switching sides and becoming an enemy of the Marines. As the man himself says, "If whom you fear for is truly your family, then do not disgrace them." By fleeing the battle, the deserters are weakening the forces of the Marines and lessening their chances of victory, which places the entire world at risk, and that is something Akainu deems punishable by death. And killing that frightened marine isn't even the most evil thing that man has done. The most despicable sin Akainu has committed in the story of One Piece thus far is actually the first thing we ever see him do in the story, destroying the evacuation ship carrying the citizens of Ohara as a safety measure. In Akainu's eyes, the 0.001% chance that this evacuation ship is harboring even a single scholar from the library that this Buster Call was arranged for in the first place is a chance that he is not willing to take. Killing all of those innocent civilians is a necessary sacrifice for the man who embodies absolute justice. To him, it's far better and easier to kill all of them than risk the tiniest chance of knowledge escaping this island, which could lead to the revival of ancient weapons and potential destruction of the entire world. And it's important to note that he specifically states that if a scholar manages to escape the island, all this sacrifice will be for naught. He isn't so detached that he doesn't recognize he's killing innocent people. He's painfully aware and considers them sacrifices. He considers this act a necessary evil. That is absolute justice in a nutshell, the complete eradication of everything Akainu considers evil. This comes from a place of genuine desire for peace, to maintain order in the seas and preserve the lives of as many innocent people as possible on a global scale. He is not somebody who simply follows orders. He wasn't told to blow up that evacuation ship. He made that order Oda himself. His actions are not determined by others, they are determined by himself and his utter dedication to his principles. This is one way in which he is incredibly similar to Luffy, on the opposite end of the spectrum. They are both men who live according to their strong moral codes. They are two of the most dedicated and uncompromising characters in the series, although these morals are practically opposites. When butting heads with Fujitora in Dressrosa, Akainu's primary concern is the image of the Marines. He's not just comfortable with covering things up, but actively encourages the lies if it will allow the Marines to maintain their dignity and save face in the eyes of the masses. While this is problematic for several reasons, it's perfectly consistent with his absolute justice. It's the same reason why he moved Marine headquarters to the New World once he was appointed Fleet Admiral. Once again, power and justice are synonymous in the world of One Piece. Those who reside at the top call the shots. They determine what justice even is. They write the rules. And so maintaining the image of being the most powerful force in the seas who control the world is exactly what Akainu values most. But ever since becoming Fleet Admiral, he's been brutally reminded that the Marines are not at the top, and they are simply the outside face of the world government. Akainu has consistently been held back by the Gorosei, and in his ignorance he views them as the Celestial Dragon's puppets, unaware of Imu's existence and the true nature of his bosses. The justice Akainu lives and breathes to enforce is decided by the world government. As the rulers of the world, justice is everything they want it to be. Good and evil is simply the opinion of celestial dragons that has been projected onto the rest of the world. And therein lies the conflict at the core of Akainu. He is simultaneously a man of principle, and yet those principles are rooted in the world government's notions of justice. And he has not been getting along well with the people who essentially control who he should be, which is what makes the future of his character so exciting. Perhaps the time where the Marines stop being the public face of the world government may be coming. The time where this military branches off and comes into its own as an individual organization with Akainu as their leader, no longer controlled by the Gorosei and free to do as he wishes. That time could be near. But that's delving into speculation, and we could be here for hours if I don't close that door, so let's move on from Akainu discussion and talk about Luffy. Monkey D. Luffy is an existentialist. He lives according to his whims, and that is his moral code, as practically everything about him revolves around the concept of freedom. Why does Luffy want to become the Pirate King? Simple. He considers the Pirate King the freest individual in the seas, as they have traveled across the world in its entirety, an absolute journey. Adventure is the ultimate expression of freedom to Luffy, the ability to go wherever you want and do whatever you want. And if something stands in his way, he'll punch through that thing and clear the way for the next adventure. Of course, as the adventure continues and he gets deeper and deeper into the Grand Line, the obstacles become more and more powerful, making Luffy's ability to express his own freedom all the more challenging. On top of this, there's no point to this adventure without his friends, so not only is he fighting to clear the way for future adventures, he is fighting to protect his friends who give the adventures any meaning in the first place. All of this is relentlessly challenged throughout the Marineford saga, starting with the separation of the crew and culminating in the death of Ace right in front of his eyes. And that paves the way for Luffy's absolute lowest moment in the entire story, covered in bandages which literally restrict his freedom of movement, declaring his weakness. Luffy is a very simple person. He's a complex character who Oda goes to great lengths to explore from various different angles, but as an individual, he is very straightforward. Luffy values freedom more than anything else. He expresses this freedom with his sense of adventure, traveling the seas with his friends. This adventure is dangerous and places not just himself, but his friends in danger, so he needs to be powerful to protect them. In the exact same way that justice is decided by those with power, so too is freedom. Luffy is only as free as he is strong, so by declaring himself weak following Marineford, he's essentially saying he isn't free. That's why Luffy mentions his dream of becoming the Pirate King right before that declaration of weakness. They are one and the same in his mind. If the Pirate King is the freest individual in the seas, they are also the most powerful, as being free in the world of One Piece means being able to travel with zero obstacles. Now, this is a very simplified take on freedom in One Piece, and there's obviously far more that can be said, but the most important thing to note is that this is how Luffy views freedom, and it is largely influenced by his experiences over the course of the Marineford saga. Losing his crew and his older brother was deeply traumatizing, and that's why he's come into the role of a protector over the course of post-time skip unlike ever before. And wouldn't you know, both of those major defeats were handed to Luffy by the Marines, the latter coming from the fist of Akainu himself. In Dressrosa, Luffy told Fujitora, "I don't care if you're an admiral or an emperor. If I don't beat each and every one of you, I'll never become the Pirate King." Once again, becoming Pirate King to Luffy means becoming the most free, which in this context is synonymous with becoming the most powerful. And this is a mentality that Akainu's actions have massively influenced. Akainu is the only person in the story to ever break Luffy's will and make him recognize his own weakness. There is nobody else in the 1100 chapters of this entire manga that has even come close to Akainu in terms of hurting Luffy. Akainu killing Ace made Luffy laugh at his own dream. The kid who has proclaimed he is going to become the king of the pirates probably more times than there are volumes of One Piece was made a crying mess who lost faith in his own ability because of the Magma Man. When have we ever seen him look like this? The answer is never, and we'll probably never see it again, which only serves to elevate Akainu's significance in the overarching narrative. There's a reason why Oda chose Akainu to be the one to put Luffy in this state. As the embodiment of absolute justice, he is Luffy's ideological antithesis. Akainu is uncompromisingly authoritarian, while Luffy values not just his own personal freedom, but the freedom of others above all else. No deeper analysis is needed here, the contrast honestly speaks for itself. Now, while I do personally think that this is a strong enough argument for Luffy vs Akainu in and of itself, I understand that others may need more convincing. Let's talk about Sabo, the older brother of Luffy who was first mentioned by name in Ace's dying moments, the Flame Emperor, and second in command of the Revolutionary Army. Sabo is a character who at first glance feels like a band-aid over the loss of Ace. They're both wielders of the Mera Mera no Mi, they're both Luffy's older brother who vowed to protect him, they're both subordinates of some of the most infamous figures in the entire world, they both can be hot-headed and impulsive, and there are more similarities between the two that make Sabo feel like the second coming of Ace. But as I said, this is what it feels like at a first glance. I do believe the notion that Sabo is simply Ace 2.0 is very reductive, but that's something that will address itself the more of Sabo we see. There is definitely a lot of superficial similarities between the two brothers, but the foundations of their characters are so fundamentally different that it's only a matter of time until Sabo completely distinguishes himself from Ace. Ace's character is about escaping the shadow of his father's legacy, finding his place in the world, discovering his own worth, and eventually, once he found those things, he dedicated himself wholly to them. He lived to serve the Whitebeard Pirates, his newfound family, and Ace had no real grand ambitions beyond making his father king and seeing Luffy achieve his unbelievable dream that we still haven't heard. Sabo, on the other hand, is a revolutionary, born an aristocrat who came to despise the corruption and self-glorification of the world nobles from a very young age. Sabo is someone with massive ambitions. He's actively trying to change the world and topple the world government, becoming the public face of the Revolutionary Army and igniting the flames of rebellion. Right now, there are more similarities than differences between Ace and Sabo, I won't deny that. But I think the main reason this is the case is because we have yet to get enough of Sabo, and the arc where we had the most of him, Dressrosa, is an arc where Ace's legacy was felt throughout the narrative, as his devil fruit was central to the plot. Regardless, whether you think Sabo is just Ace 2.0 or not, that notion is one of the biggest reasons why people think Sabo should be the one to defeat Akainu, by dismantling the natural superiority of magma over fire and delivering a karmic justice upon Akainu for killing Ace with Ace's own powers. It is a very satisfying narrative, but it doesn't work anywhere near as effectively as Luffy vs Akainu for a bunch of reasons. Firstly, inherited will. The idea that the living will carry on the wills and dreams of past generations, essentially being spiritual successors. Eating his devil fruit and being the older brother that's there to protect Luffy in his stead is enough to say that Sabo has inherited Ace's will. But these aren't really defining aspects of Ace's will, and also don't really align with how inherited will is typically written in One Piece. Sabo and Ace are very different people ideologically, and they have different dreams, which I think are the most important things when it comes to inherited inherited will. There are two other characters who also inherit Ace's will, but in the more conventional sense, as people who share either his dream or his ideals: Yamato and Luffy. Let's start with the former. Both Ace and Yamato are people shackled by their blood ties, the legacy of their fathers, and their characters are largely about looking for a place within the world. Just like Ace, Yamato doesn't have any massive aspirations beyond seeing Luffy achieve his unbelievable dream, an aspiration that was passed on to Yamato specifically by Ace. Sabo does of course share this dream, but this isn't something he inherited from Ace. Sabo was there and learnt of this dream at the same time as him. And Luffy has inherited Ace's will, especially in terms of their ideals. He comes to the land of Wano and fulfills his older brother's promises in his stead, creating a place where people can eat as much food as they want, breaking Yamato's chains, and just generally serving the role of an older brother for several characters like Momonosuke and Bonnie. There's also the Red Hawk, which is just like Sabo inheriting Ace's Fire Fist. Secondly, and far more importantly in my opinion, Sabo has much bigger fish to fry. That might be funny to hear since Luffy is literally trying to become the Pirate King and is also almost guaranteed to face off against Imu, who is a far greater threat than Akainu, but just hear me out. Sabo, as the Chief of Staff of the Revolutionary Army, exists in a position where his duty supersedes his personal emotions. He is literally told, you can't go and fight a naval admiral out of a personal grudge, in plain words. That is not the case for Luffy. If Luffy sees Akainu and feels like he wants to punch his face off, he will do it without a second thought. Sabo, on the other hand, is not only in a position of responsibility, but the Marines aren't even his enemy. The Revolutionary Army's main enemy are the Celestial Dragons. They don't want to destroy the world government, they want to take out the forces of evil that control the world government. This has been reiterated on several occasions, even by Sabo himself. And to top it all off, Sabo just isn't the revenge type. Chapter 787 shows his interaction with Burgess, where he outright states that he doesn't blame Blackbeard's crew for what happened to Ace, because that was the life his brother chose. On the other hand, Luffy absolutely does act on vengeance. It may not be for himself, but he has sought out revenge for wrongdoings done to others on several occasions. He fought Arlong because he made Nami cry. He specifically went and looked for Bellamy to beat his ass despite being advised not to avenge Cricket. He beat the hell out of the Frankie family for beating up Usopp. He attacks Blackbeard in Impel Down specifically for getting Ace captured. He attacks Kaido in a frenzy for seemingly killing his crew in Act 1 of Wano. And Luffy also does hold grudges, although his anger is typically short-lived. He didn't want to team up with Crocodile in Impel Down because of what he did to Vivi and Arabasta, but he still went through with it because Ivankov was vouching. Frankie was forgiven and allowed to join the crew after proving himself during Enies Lobby, becoming one of his closest comrades. Even Bellamy was forgiven and became a friend of Luffy's. The only long-term grudge we've really seen from Luffy over the course of this entire story is the one he holds for Akainu. As I said earlier on, Luffy is scarred by Akainu both literally and figuratively. According to the Road to Laughter magazine, aching scars seem to indicate a fated enemy. Even without these magazine statements, Oda has used scars very deliberately over the course of the story to tie certain characters together. Zoro is left with his trademark scars after his first duel with Mihawk in Baratie, and he vows never to lose again until he defeats Mihawk and achieves his dream. Shanks supposedly has countless scars, but the only one that aches is the one he received from Blackbeard, and these characters are so tightly connected they haven't appeared on a volume cover without each other. The scar Oden gave Kaido left him fantasizing over a fight of that caliber for 20 years, and so it stands to reason that Luffy's now iconic chest scar ties him to Akainu. The mere mention of his name in chapter 650 had Luffy sweating and clenching his scar. His feelings towards Akainu are very apparent. To make things even more obvious, Jinbei starts to talk about Blackbeard in the following pages, and Luffy is literally not even listening. Both of these characters are responsible for the death of Ace in their own ways, but only one of them has Luffy's ear. Only one of them has Luffy holding a grudge 2 years later. And on the topic of scars, funnily enough, Sabo's burn scars around his eye are the result of being shot by a celestial dragon, further reinforcing where his narrative lies. I think I've made Luffy's incentive to fight Akainu clear enough, but what about the Fleet Admiral himself? Well, if he remains the dog of the world government, then that's self-explanatory, but what if the Marines do break off from the world government and become their own individual entity under Akainu's rule, like a massive pirate crew of their own? What incentive will Akainu Akainu have for fighting Luffy then? Throughout Marineford, Akainu exclusively refers to Luffy as Dragon's son. He tries desperately to kill the boy simply for being the child of the world's worst criminal. In the post-time skip, Akainu refers to Luffy as Straw Hat, telling us that he recognizes Luffy himself as a terrible criminal that needs to be punished. Who do you think Akainu will consider the world's worst criminal once Luffy becomes the Pirate King? I don't think I need to answer that question. If the Marines do their own thing, what better way to legitimize themselves than to go after the Pirate King, to go after the world's worst criminal? That alone is more than enough of an incentive for Akainu. Then again, he may consider the world government a bigger priority if he's revolting, but like I said earlier, that is going far too deep into speculation and we'll be here for hours. What's funny about this topic of Luffy versus Akainu though, is that nobody in the One Piece community ever doubts that Blackbeard will be one of Luffy's greatest enemies, and yet with Akainu, it's so incredibly controversial despite already having a strong emotional hook. Everybody thinks Blackbeard's gonna kill Shanks and that is gonna make Luffy despise him, but Akainu has already killed Ace, who Luffy should care about even more. Akainu has also been paired with Blackbeard multiple times. He is essentially the Blackbeard of the Marines as far as Luffy is concerned. He is the figurehead of the pirates' ultimate enemies. He is the pinnacle of the Marines in the worst generation. If Roger had rivals in the Marines during his era, is it so wild to think that Akainu could be the equivalent of a Garp or Sengoku in the current day? To be one of the Marines who will contend with the pinnacle of piracy? I don't think so, but this video has become far longer than I originally intended for it to be, and I feel like I've covered all of the main talking points for why I feel like Luffy and Akainu's fates are intertwined. I do think it's very possible that Sabo has a role in this picture. Perhaps it's a 2v1 situation against Akainu, although that may be overkill. Perhaps Akainu resorts to cheap tactics and nearly lands a killing blow on Luffy or Sabo, with Sabo or Luffy swooping in to save the day in mirror fashion to Ace, although this time the one who swoops in doesn't get turned into a donut like Ace did. Luffy also often starts out losing against his enemies. He keeps on trying until he succeeds. Against Crocodile he almost died twice. Against Doflamingo he depended on the assistance of various others while he regained his haki. Kaido defeated him multiple times, even killing him at one point. But Akainu is a different story. His sheer destructive force is unlike anything else in the story. If Luffy makes a mistake, he'll find himself with a hole in his chest, and I don't think he can escape death like he did in 1043 a second time. So this won't be the typical Luffy fight where he starts out losing but wins the battle of endurance. There's a million ways this could go down. All I know for certain is that Luffy and Akainu are a match made in heaven, and it would be a damn shame if Oda didn't give them the slugfest they deserve. I hope you enjoyed my first One Piece video in a very long time, and if you'd like to see more, leave a like and let me know in the comments. Depending on how well this video is received, I may continue to make One Piece videos since I've been loving the recent chapters and there are countless things to discuss. Thank you guys for watching and have an amazing day.